Let's hear what Jesus has to say in Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 12. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Before I begin the message this morning, I want to introduce to you all our was playing lead guitar with us, Sean. Sean's a cousin of mine. He's staying with us for a month or so while he's taking a class here. And Tim was not going to be able to be here today, and so Sean volunteered. We got him up here and played, and I think he did a great job. So thanks, Sean. 18, never played with anybody else, just played by himself in the house. And if you can imagine how my house sounds these days with Thomas and Sean there together. Thomas likes to sit out on the front porch and play the guitar a lot. And guy who sees me often driving by, he said, "Who's that guitar guy on your porch?" And well, that's my son, and so now he hadn't asked me yet, but I'm just waiting for, now, do you have two sons? But our scripture lesson this morning, and I can't think of any way to contrast for us more what the world tells us about who we are and what Jesus tells us about who we are than that video and then the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus' teachings to us in the Beatitudes. The world will tell us we are what we consume, we are what we have, we are the car we drive. I bought into that for a long time. I still buy into it somewhat. That's something I'm divesting myself of. But the world tells us we are the things that we have in our life. And that because we live in this consumeristic world, everything has been taken over by the economy, by what we can sell, by what we can buy, and it decides everything. It decides everything. However you feel about President Bush, I just remember how wrong it felt for me after the attack on New York City when he said, travel to Disney World and go out and buy something. Because that is the consumeristic worldview that we live in, that we keep the economy rolling and everything else will be fine. Don't let the economy get messed up. Keep our stock market going well, all those things. We live in a world that is driven by this consumeristic value. I just don't want to live that way. I don't think that's who we're called to be or how we are called to live. On this Saints' Day, we come to live life by a different worldview. Jesus, in the Gospel of Matthew, the writer of Matthew wants to make clear to us that in his view, Jesus is the new Moses. Moses came to bring a law that was to bring order to our life and direction to our life. And Jesus is one who comes to bring for us another way of being, not in contradiction to the law, but one that is a higher righteousness than the law. So when we read through the Gospel of Matthew, we see over and over again this being reinforced. in the way that he tells us about Jesus. Now, I'm saying that because each of the gospel writers tell us a little bit different perspective of who Jesus is. Think about the Sermon on the Mount. We call it the Sermon on the Mount. Whichever gospel it's in two of them. It's in Matthew and it's in Luke. But you know what happens? In Matthew, Jesus goes up on the mountain to share this. Like Moses goes up on the mountain to receive the law, the Ten Commandments. But in the Gospel of Luke, it's very different because he wants us to know another very important aspect of who Jesus is. In Luke's Gospel, these same words are given, and it's called the Sermon on the Plain. The Sermon on the Plain. Can you contrast that in your mind for a little bit? The Sermon on the Mount, the one who is the second Moses, the one who fulfills all of the law, and he brings a new teaching that we are to live by a righteousness, a love in our hearts that's bigger than anything that the law can ever bring about. And then for Luke, he says that the sermon, the same words, are given on a plain. Think about this. This may help us too. When each of them tell us about who Jesus is at Jesus' birth, in the Gospel of Matthew, do you remember who it is that comes? The kings. The kings, the magi, come from afar. In the Gospel of Luke, it's the shepherds. Shepherds, common people, ordinary people. He gives the sermon on the plain because he wants us to know that this is for every one of us. Not just those who are high, but for those who are low. For every one of us, that this gospel is for us. So Luke wants us to see this part about who Jesus is. Matthew, on the other hand, is telling us that this is the fulfillment of the law, to live by this way. So the Sermon on the Mount, in essence, becomes the new 10 Commandments. The Beatitudes do. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the humble. Blessed are those who show mercy. For those, they will be shown mercy. Qualities that by our world sometimes are seen as weak, seen as qualities that will let you get trampled over in life. I have a hard time living by the Beatitudes all the time. I try to put love and compassion and mercy at the heart of how I live, to live that way with everybody. But it's hard because my first nature in life is not to be that way. My first nature in life is to be one who wins. And I don't mean anything negative about this, about athletics. I love athletics. I mean, I grew up going from baseball in the spring and summer, swim team in the summer, football in the fall, wrestling, and then we started again with baseball. I mean, it was constant, always playing. I love to win. And my first nature, my first instinct is to want to win and find a way to win. But in Jesus, I found something that's more important. And that's my real call to ministry was about that experience. It was whenever I was a teenager. And I felt like there was no place in the world I could be vulnerable because I needed to always win. I needed to never be vulnerable in my life and to find a way to always win. And as I was a part of the youth group at the church, under the leadership of a young woman who was only there for about a year as the youth director, but she helped create a community where I knew I was loved by her, by the community, by God, no matter how I performed on the ball field. And that was a lesson I needed to learn because I was so driven by competition, and I still want to win. I mean, I love to set objectives. I want to try to achieve them. I want to have a goal that we're working toward, and all that is a part of me, and it's part of how God made me, so I think there's some gifts in that. But what Jesus says to us is we don't want our life to be driven by that way of living because we are more than how we perform. We are more than what we possess. We are more than what the bank account says. We are more than all of those things. All those they're the least of importance. And so everything I do about the church is I want us to create a community where that is absolutely felt, where we know that kind of love in the church community, that kind of acceptance where people can come and bring their whole life, their heart to worship. In that intro video, when Sharon says, church was how I got my life together. You know, we think we have to get it together. Church is the place where we get it together. And it's through the help of each other. If we wait to get it together before we ever come, we'll be waiting our life long. But it is the place, it's the community by which we can get it together. And that's important. I didn't know, a young man that come talk to me this week who, he said, I didn't understand it about myself, about how I was raised. He said, I was raised, and to kind of describe it for him, to be a narcissist, to only think about myself and to never have empathy for anyone. And I finally realized there's a part of me that has empathy, and it's a part of my nature, and it wasn't a part of my parents who raised me. And because for them, it was never a part of any decision that was to be made. And then he said, and I see in you something different. And maybe that you live by a different way. And that impressed me because I try hard. I mean, I really try hard, but it's not my first nature to live in a way that has empathy and care and compassion toward everybody immediately. It's a lifestyle we have to adopt into our lives to live. And that he could see that in me, it felt good to know that. We're here on All Saints' Day to remember that God creates us as people to live by a different worldview than the world would create us to live by, to be a part of this communion of saints. You know, long before there was a Halloween, there was an All Saints' Day. There was the Hallowed Day, Hallowed Eve, All Hallows Eve. Halloween came afterward. It was the night before we celebrated all of the great saints of the church. And so today we remember these folks who gave their life in a way, lived their life in such a way that God was at the heart, the core of who they are in many ways. When we think about the church as we're gathered together, the church is a holy people. We are a people who are holy, not perfect. Isn't that right, Joe Bob? I saw you here earlier. Not all perfect, like the video says. We are imperfect people on our way toward what God would call us to be. We're not perfect, but yet we are a holy people trying to live by that value. The time I stepped out of pastoral ministry and went to work at the seminary at Candler back in Atlanta, one of the things I really enjoyed doing, there's a fellow named Tom Long who was a preaching professor there. Tom and I would go to lunch together occasionally. He liked to do that with me because in the seminary, most everybody, none of them had been pastors, had pastored churches. Most of them had their PhD in church history, and they could tell you everything about church history. We need folks like that. Or, you know, they would have their PhD in New Testament, and they could take you into the meaning of the Greek deeper than you could ever understand otherwise. But he liked to sit down with someone who'd just been a pastor and worked on preaching. And at the time, he was working on a book, and it's since been out. It's been, maybe just because of these conversations, it's been my most fun book to read over the last several years. You may be surprised, but it's called Accompany Them with Singing, The Christian Funeral. And we would talk together, he and I would, about, as he was working on his book, about funerals and issues that pastors deal with in funerals and things that they should be doing and things that congregations, sometimes individuals, family members want to have happen at funerals and how you kind of accommodate all those things and different traditions from one place to another. And those are some of the deep conversations that I shared during that time. Part of what kind of helped me to make the decision to come back to Oklahoma and to serve in the pastorate again after those few years out. And he came to the conclusion there are three things that need to be a part of every funeral. And that is that every funeral celebrates the life of holy people, people who have lived their lives trying to follow God's way. And not to do it perfectly. We don't do it perfectly. But I was thinking about some of the folks who we're remembering today. I was thinking about Buddy McCorder, and I remember going to visit him and sitting on the front porch. Actually, when I came up, he was asleep in the house, and I knocked on the door. I rang the doorbell, and he didn't answer, but you can only get to the door by passing by this big window that looks into the living room, and he was asleep in the lounge chair right there, and so I knew he was there. I knew he would want to answer the door if he knew I was here, so I banged on the window and woke him up, and he came to the door, and then we sat out on the porch and we talked, and we talked about life, about family, about his girls, about how he coached baseball because he didn't have any boys, but he really wanted to, and so he coached one of the little league teams for a number of years, and how he connected with his girls in one way, and in a way he needed that other place to connect, and a part of his life. We talked about the post office and about gardening, just kind of the regular things you talk about in life. And I remember just enjoying the time with Buddy. I remember, too, that after he had passed away, I realized that his best friend here in town was Seabrook Griffin, and I didn't know that. As soon as they said Seabrook, it made the connection for me, because in Prague, there's a Seabrook Griffin there who he had told me his mom lived in Chickasha whenever we were coming here, and Seabrook was one of my closest friends while we were in Prague, and I thought, how many Seabrooks could there be in the world? Funny story about Seabrook, although it's not All Saints Day for him. But Seabrook, he taught a Tai Chi class at our church, and we were doing it. A lot of folks in the church who were kind of interested, and there was one fellow who I was a close friend with who would always there for the class, and he was in his 70s, and former guy who used to buy and sell for Tyson there on Hogs, and you wouldn't have thought him going to a Tai Chi class. And anyway, I'd missed a week, and there were all these moves we would do in the Tai Chi class, and one would be like push the mountain, and the other was to do something to a monkey or whatever. And so I'd missed a class, and I came that next week, and Seabrook said something, he kind of called me out about having missed, and I said, that's all right, because I talked to this person, and he told me that the next move we were working on was toss the possum, and it didn't fit really into the Tai Chi, so Seabrook made up this whole move that was toss the possum that got added into our Tai Chi movement. But I was thinking about Buddy and thinking about that, thinking about Vanita Light, and a person who served as a teacher for so many years, way up into her 90s. She lived, and visiting with her, and Angie was able to go with me on some of those visits, and so Angie and she talked a bit about teaching and just the connection that was made there, and it was really a neat. She's a neat person, and how. About a year before she passed away, she had decided long before and included in her estate, she wanted to leave a gift for a children's home in Texas, a Methodist children's home. And she got concerned that maybe it wasn't even still in existence. And so she called me to find out. And so I did a little research and found out they were really doing great, doing well, and conveyed that. But someone who was so aware into her late 90s and the faculties that she had about life to make sure that everything was going well. Think about Ruth King and her place here every Sunday. Think about Richard picking her up every Sunday and bringing her to be here. I think about how she got here whenever many of you didn't get here on Sundays, but she would be here. I told her she was my trump card for everybody about why they couldn't get to church on Sunday. You know, if Ruth King can get here to church on Sunday, you can get to church here on Sunday, right? And I'll never forget the week that we'd gotten to know each other a little bit, but whenever Richard came to the back door with her and kind of tearfully he said, Mom wants to talk to you. And when she got there, she wasn't tearful. She said, you're going to do my funeral, so we need to get to know each other. And just think of the beauty of her life and the way that she impacted so many people. I think of Margie Stanislaus. And I got to kind of get to know her even before I showed up because her husband got to know me on Facebook and was sending me messages and poems, you know how Carl is, and even before I ever showed up. So that on the list of things that I needed to do the first week I got here was go visit Carl and Margie. And so we got that set up. I remember sitting close to her on her couch because she couldn't see well. And she couldn't quite make out the beard, and so I took her hand and placed it on my face so she could feel the beard. That was very uncomfortable for her. I remember that because she was very proper, and that didn't feel right to her. But person who lived faithfully as a part of our church, and give thanks for her presence and for the way that she helped impact each of our lives. Think of Sherry. And I think of how first time I met Bob and Sherry was at an environmental coalition for the Oklahoma Annual Conference, and people who wanted to be able to help make a difference and impact issues of the environment. And they were there, and you would know Sherry because she came in wheeling in on her cart, and because of Misty, her dog, who was with her all the time. And that's where I first got to meet them. I think about their faithfulness in coming in days it wouldn't have been easy, but because they felt the cause was one that was important, they came and they were there. Those are the two things I remember most. I remember, too, that we brought a proposal to the annual conference, and about faithfulness and related to the environment. And that was that every Methodist church and every Methodist parsonage should buy a portion of its energy as a renewable resource. After annual conference, we debated it. We were smart because we were always able to figure out where 51% was. We could figure out how far we could push and win still, and get as much done as we could. It was hotly debated, you can imagine. But after that week of conference was over, do you know what happened? Pastors, treasurers from churches began calling their energy providers and saying, we'd like to buy at least some portion of our energy as a renewable energy resource. Do you know what happened in the next year? They started putting windmills up all across western Oklahoma. They said they'd never had so many phone calls in a week or two period about renewable energy, and they thought there's something happening. They wanted to make sure that they were on top of it. It was required that all energy companies provide some form of renewable energy. Now, however you feel about that, it's a way I think of us to be faithful to what God has called us in stewardship to this earth. And those were some of the early days that we shared together, and I remember Sherry being a part of that work. I think about Mandy. And I think about a person whose life was so full of laughter and fun. I think about someone who just lived life fearlessly and courageously. I think about her at Walmart working, she worked at the bank there at Walmart and looking out over the people that come to shop at Walmart. You know how people come to shop at Walmart, I mean, they come every which way, and Mandy just loved to people watch, and I'm sure make comments too about how people come to Walmart to shop, and think about how fun-loving her life was. And I think about the thing we just wished for was that we had had more time. I think about people who just enjoyed life. I think about Kevin Holman. I think about a young man who found his passion in life and found a way to be able to live it and actually receive support from it. He was a professional juggler, Kevin was. Not many people get to say that about themselves. They follow their passion and were able to make a living at it. Loved to do it. He was a world champion, I believe, a person who just was able to share his life and his fun-loving nature and to make a difference in the world doing what he loved. I think of Leanne Worrell and how I really didn't ever know her because she had left this community, but about how her sisters faithfully called and sent emails to me as we worked for several months to plan the service for her life. And I felt like by the time we got done, I knew her. And to know a bit of her nature and the way that life was not easy for her. But she lived it joyfully, and she found a way to live it courageously and to deal with many difficulties in her life. She suffered from mental illness, but she lived it courageously, and she was able to not be a victim to it, but to live life fully in light of it. It helped shape her to be the person that she is. And I think about each of these people and how their lives were a part of being a holy people, a holy person. We remember. There was a story that I love to tell. It's about a man who, he and his brother were just scoundrels. They were in business, a town about this size. And they took advantage of everybody at every opportunity they possibly could. And one of them passed away. And the brother who was living, he was determined to find a pastor in town who would do his brother's funeral. And he tried and he tried, and everybody turned him down. Finally, he said, I'm going to give $10,000 to the church of the pastor who's willing to do my brother's funeral and to call him a saint. And finally, the Methodist preacher stood up. He said, we can use that $10,000. And so he did the funeral. And as he began to talk about the brother, he said, we all know he was a scoundrel. He cheated everybody in business. They profiteered in every way they possibly could. But compared to his brother, he is a saint. We don't have any of those people on our list today. We have people who lived life faithfully and tried to make a difference and maybe had struggles that they dealt with. Who of us doesn't? But they're people who lived their life in light of God's place in their life. We do it in the context of a holy people or a holy place. And that holy place is the church. We celebrate the life of each of these within this church because it was their church, because it was a part of who they are. And even in times that they had been in other places, the church universal. Can you imagine how many times these individuals came forward in the life of the church to celebrate communion, to kneel at the rail, to draw closer to God in their lives? Can you imagine how they came bringing their children, sometimes screaming along to come to church with them? How they impacted others' lives by their presence, by Sunday school, by being there with each other. In the life of the church, coming up and down this aisle as a symbol of our connection to who God is, connected in this place. One of the things that I know through experience, I've done 300 or 400 funerals. I've done lots of funerals in my ministry. In fact, when I was at Wesley, I had a friend who said, finally I was looking through the journal and I found one category that Wesley leads the conference in: deaths each year. We had dozens of people who passed away every year and funerals that were done. And the thing I know is that those who survived, those who passed away, the degree to which the church is a part of their life, the more equipped they are to be able to deal with their loss and be able to move forward. The less connected they are to church, the more distant they are and the harder time they often have in being able to move through loss to a place of normalcy again. Not that it becomes all the way it was before, it doesn't. It becomes a different normal. But those who are connected to church and a part of life with each other, you see someone else losing a loved one the year before. You see it happening, and you know that there's a context, there are people you can talk to, there is a community that surrounds you. And as our faith is connected to God, we have resources available to us to help make it through. All of these people, their lives connected to a holy place. The third thing is that he said to me, Tom Long, he said, there's a holy person we celebrate, and we do it in a holy place, but we do it in the context of a holy people. And that is the community of faith that surrounds us. This community of holy saints and on our way saints, not people who have it all together, but people who are moving toward God's will and direction in our life. And finally, we do it in context of a holy story. There is a story of our life and our faith that our life fits into. And it is that we are God's. Before we are each other's, we are God's. And that our life is lived in him, and that we are redeemed through Christ's act of self-giving for us. And that because our life is redeemed, we have life eternal and connected. And that life temporal in this world and life eternal are not so different from one another. They're just shades of difference as we move. We see the church temporal now. We feel the church eternal as we are here. I know I've told you this before. It's one of the things that I hope you understand completely in your life. In the Orthodox Church, the eastern part of the church, back before the 9th century when the church split into east and west, the eastern part of the church, the Orthodox Church, believes that when you walk into the sanctuary, worship doesn't start when Scott stands up and says, "Let us begin the worship." They believe that worship takes place all the time, and that when we walk into the sanctuary, we walk in to the eternal praises of God that are going on, and that the pews where we sit and these places that are empty around us, that they're not empty. Those filling those seats are the church eternal. They are each one of the people who we remember today. Mandy and Ruth and Kevin, each one of those people are here with us as we worship today. But the whole church eternal, all those who've come before us. And when we join our worship with theirs, it is lifted because it is something we share together. I remember so clearly Fred Craddock, he was my preaching professor, talking about death. And he was talking about it in the context of a young woman who was a faculty member when he was teaching at Phillips University. She's a young woman. She developed cancer. And he said that, as everybody kind of rallied around her and she began her treatments, they sensed that outside her house, beneath the tree, death was standing there. We think Grim Reaper, sickle, dark death. He says, we used to play games about it, would lean against the door and would say, "He's not getting in here, we're not letting him in here." And they would create a space that was safe. And death was outside, and they were fighting to hold death off. She went through the first round of treatments, and She lost all her hair, but she came back to teach the next semester, and she's wearing a wig. And he said, I think that looks better, actually. And she's doing all right, and makes it through, and then everything seems okay until another word from the doctor, and start the treatments again, and they go through. And this time they all rally around her again, ready to fight death, to hold death off. And this time it's not as easy. But she makes it through, and she gets back to teaching again. And then finally, she gets the diagnosis again that it's returned. They all come together. They're all leaning against the door to hold death away. And what he says is that she said to us, step back and open the door. That it's time. It's time. He said, we had made death to be our enemy. Oh, yellow-eyed death sitting out there. We wanted to mock him and to hold him off. And then when he came in, it was different. When he came in, he was holding peace in one hand and rest in the other. Our story is a part of God's story. And our life and our death are a part of his redemption in this world. And that when we make death the enemy, we misunderstand what life is about. Life is not the opposite of death. Death is not the opposite of life. It's a part of this journey that we follow. And it doesn't mean then that death doesn't hold power. Death, we feel sorrow. We feel grief. But there's a joy that's bigger than that grief that we feel. And there's a community that we are a part of that's bigger than the pain that we feel. And it is God's story of faith that carries us through. A song written by Amy Grant and her husband, Vince Gill, tells the story. Threaten me with heaven. That's all they can do. You can tell that there's a feeling of the spouse, of loss. There's going to be a time when I lose you. And he says, when Vince Gill sings it, he says, all they can do is threaten me with heaven. They can't take away the time that we shared. They can't do anything to that. All they can do is threaten me with a place in God's eternal kingdom. It's not the end of our story. It's not the end of our life. There are things far worse than death. Far worse. Life is life here, and it is life eternal, and it is in his story that we share our life. Sorry to be so emotional. I don't know why. It just kind of connects and speaks to me in a way that I just can't do it any other. But the truth is, it's not just about those 10 that we remember today and the others that we hold in our hearts as well. But it's our turn to live this story. We don't just come to celebrate that life and death and resurrection and new hope are a part of their lives, but we do it because it's a part of our life also. And we are those saints who are going on toward holiness, who are living faithfully to share love and compassion in places where no one else will see it if we don't take it. Our life, it's our turn now. It's our turn to step up to the mic, to step up to the plate, in whatever way you want to describe it. It's our time to saddle the horse. It's our time to get going. It's our time to be a part of the journey, to let his redemption carry us forward to help bring redemption in the lives of other people. There's nothing more powerful than a life turned around, than someone who has been trying to figure it out, and then all of a sudden they've got it, and they have that connection in their life. Don't you want to be a part of helping someone to make that step in their life? It's our turn. It's your turn. And we stand in the place of those who have come before us, and they hand us the baton, and we get to carry it on. Amen.